Hey everyone, this is Sergey, and welcome to my class, Literature 316, or also known as Film and Literature. Welcome to our discussion on film adaptations, yay or nay. Today, we'll explore the complex relationship between literature and film, particularly when a literary masterpiece is adapted for the big screen. Should we celebrate these adaptations or approach them with skepticism? Well, at this point, I think it's about time for us to dive in. So, let's start with this one. When watching a film based on a book, do you prefer reading the book first or watching the film without preconceived notions? If you read first, you might find yourself critiquing every detail. If you watch first, the film shapes your initial perception of the story. No, actually, there's no right answer here, just different experiences. Think about your own preferences as we move forward, just like the films here or these film adaptations. I know a lot of you here probably have a few comments to say about this film adaptation or that film adaptation of a novel or a masterpiece, a literary masterpiece, thinking that, oh, okay, this one was actually on point when bringing this masterpiece to the silver screen, or bringing it, or basically bringing it to life. Some of you perhaps would even say, nah, I didn't like the way they, put life to this literary piece. How many things were missed out in it? I think some of you even have a lot of good or even bad things to say on this film, Twilight. But anyway, Julia Adams, a writer from phc.edu, highlights a common struggle for book lovers. When watching an adaptation, your mind races with comparisons. The character's look, the setting, even how emotions are portrayed. And so the imagination you formed while reading clashes with the director's vision. Now, this phenomenon is what you call imaginative dissonance, and it's at the heart of our discussion. So, what makes a quality adaptation? What makes it so good? Is it strict fidelity to the source material? Or can creative liberties improve the story? The answer lies somewhere in between. A quality adaptation respects the essence of the original while translating it effectively into the visual language of cinema. Well, in this case, we have this quote by Dr. Corey Bruel, which I would like to share with you because it makes a very interesting point. By the way, Dr. Corey Bruel is a professor of literature at Patrick Henry College. And he argues that a good adaptation stands on its own. It must honor the book enough to be called an adaptation, but also it carves out its own identity as a film. This balance is where artistry meets authenticity. Why don't we take a look at a few examples? Let's start with this one. The adaptations of the Odyssey. I believe you have heard of so many comments coming from so many critics or even moviegoers who have a lot of things to say about the Odyssey, a Greek epic hero, or a great epic, by the way, that has been adapted to the silver screen and even, well, deconstructed in many ways by so many directors, whether on film or television. A faithful adaptation doesn't have to replicate ancient Greece. While many films and series adapt the story in modern or culturally distinct settings while retaining the core plot and themes. Just like this film, Oh Brother, where art thou? It's not the setting, but it's actually the spirit of the story that matters here. Another example is this, A Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which was reimagined as Apocalypse Now and was set during the Vietnam War instead of colonial Africa, which was the setting of the novel. Now, the surface details changed, but the core conflict, which is the journey into the heart of human darkness, remained intact. This shows how setting can shift while preserving thematic integrity. Another great example of a film adaptation, one that can be considered as a good quality film adaptation, is Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, which happens to be a trilogy. While he made changes such as enhancing Arwen's role, the heart of Tolkien's narrative remained. Jackson had the story in his back pocket while transforming it into a cinematic masterpiece. I think some of you here may probably be divided when it comes to the next set of examples. Here we have Tom Cruise playing the character of Jack Reacher, and in a TV series played by another actor who also plays the same character. So many people were divided, by the way, when they make comparisons between the actors who portrayed the character of Jack Reacher. Some would say Tom Cruise was not a good fit because, in the first place, based on the book, Jack Reacher is supposed to be much taller in terms of height compared to Tom Cruise, and his build is much more robust compared to Tom's. Nevertheless, this brings us to imaginative dissonance, the tension between how readers imagine a story and how filmmakers present it. It's actually inevitable. No two imaginations are alike. As viewers, we must decide whether to embrace the director's vision or resist it. That's why some people resisted the version of Tom Cruise in the film Jack Reacher. While there are those who would say, well, the director of the TV series Reacher hit the bullseye at so many levels. So in this case then, this leads us to the concept of hermeneutics of generosity, a term often used in literary and cultural studies. It suggests approaching interpretations, whether of a text or a film adaptation, with openness and goodwill, rather than rigid judgment. Before we go to the bottom of this concept, let's talk about hermeneutics first. Okay, so to define hermeneutics, it is actually the study of interpretation. It was originally applied to texts, especially religious or philosophical works, and it explores how meaning is derived from language, context, and of course the perspective of the interpreter. But over time, it expanded to include other types of works or fields like art, culture, media, and film. And when it comes to hermeneutics, I'd like to bring up three important sub-concepts. So when watching a film adaptation of a literary piece, hermeneutics helps us understand the gap between the original text and the film. Here's how it applies. First, we have the dynamic meaning. This refers to how every reader interprets a book differently based on personal experiences, cultural background, and imagination. So this dynamic meaning shapes expectations when watching an adaptation. When it comes to creative interpretation, here the filmmaker, just like the reader, interprets the text. The film becomes the director's hermeneutical lens, highlighting themes, characters, and settings based on a vision rather than strict adherence to the text. Now, as we go further down to the case of hermeneutics of generosity, this concept, just to clarify, whose vision should we actually go for? Should it be the reader's vision or the director's vision? This one tells us that viewers should approach adaptations with an open mind, understanding that no adaptation can perfectly capture everyone's imagined version of the book. So instead of focusing on the deviations, the things that were not included by the director in the film adaptation, or the things that were included depending on the percentage, well, viewers appreciate or should appreciate how the filmmaker reinterprets the story for a new medium. So going back to Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola, which is a perfect example of a reinterpretation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So as it shifted the setting from colonial Africa to the Vietnam War, the core themes are still intact for one thing, and that's what matters the most. Themes like moral corruption and the darkness within humanity were highlighted. The same themes were shared, are shared by this film adaptation and a reinterpretation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And if you open yourself in that way, focusing more on the themes and how these themes are concretized through the story of the characters, you won't feel frustrated at the end, even if you obviously noticed that the setting has actually or had been changed, and now it's in a Southeast Asian country. So the idea of hermeneutics of generosity tells us that there is a dynamic meaning and an imaginative reality that cannot be satisfied completely. With the physical manifestation of the character on each page comes an assumption of the general path the character would take. Therefore, when reading a book, we construct dynamic meaning based on our perspective. This meaning shapes the imaginative reality we expect from an adaptation. However, film is a collaborative art form, and each person involved, such as the director, screenwriter, actor, adds their own imaginative touch. So, in this case then, ultimately, an adaptation is a transaction between the original author's vision, the filmmaker's interpretation, and the audience's expectations. Rarely will these three align perfectly, but understanding this helps us appreciate the adaptation as a unique work of art. So, don't be so hard on yourself in the film. So when watching an adaptation, just take it easy. Appreciate it for what it offers, while acknowledging the gaps between your imagination and the director's creative choices. To conclude, whether you say or nay to adaptations often depends on how generously you approach them. Are you watching to find flaws? Or are you open to experiencing a familiar story in a new light? That mindset can make all the difference. Much of today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, was inspired by Julia Adams' article, What Makes a Quality Film Adaptation, from phc.edu. If you're interested, I recommend reading the full article for further insights. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless all of you. and continue watching movies to inspire you to become a better person. Take care and bye-bye.